When a new raid tier releases, the best of the best will get together to race, to pit themselves against one another to see who can puzzle solve, optimize every inch out of their jobs, and communicate with their team the best, to eventually defeat each flaw and claim the coveted title of World First. It could take days of long hours, iron focus, and grueling consistency checks. Or in this case, weeks. This is the story of a world race so intensely close that the victor of one of its bosses was decided by less than 1 single minute. One with a victory so impressive and unexpected that even Square Enix themselves couldn't believe it had happened as soon as it did. This is the story of the second Coil of Bahamut.
It's gonna be a tight one.
I will be clutching in B parts.
Everything.
I need big news.
Yes! I fucking love all of you guys. Yes!
Too powerful.
Yes!
Congratulations.
Fucking good.
Fucking good job, guys.
This video is sponsored by Ragnarok M Classic, the official authorized return to classic MMO experience, available on your mobile devices. Unlike the majority of free-to-play titles nowadays, there are no pay-to-win shortcuts or cash stores containing all of the desirable drops. Instead, everything is earned through the in-game currency Zenny. You feel rewarded for all the time you spend adventuring, grinding monsters, and exploring the rich world, as everything that drops, gear, cards, materials, headgear, can be bought or sold at the exchange, as well as traded in the thriving player market. The game takes place in the rich world of Midgard, including busy, lived-in towns, wide open plains, winding forests, and mysterious dungeons rife with challenging battles to attempt alongside your friends or guild. The original 6 classes from Ragnarok Online are all here and faithfully recreated, and each features their own skill tree and progression track. There's also a real-time class changing system so that players can carefully plan and strategize for the needs of their current challenge. There's tons of quality of life too, such as offline battle, allowing you to optimize your progress whilst you're away from the screen living life. Click the link in the description to download Ragnarok M Classic today, the authentic Ragnarok Online experience based on gameplay. Thank you so much again for sponsoring this video. A Realm Reborn was a time of experimentation for the developers. Content structure, timing, and design philosophy wasn't yet set in stone. With the release of 2.0 had come the binding coil of Bahamut, the continuation of a story that had literally been used to take down the servers of the original failed game, and the first raid aiming to entice players to make FF14 their mainstay home. What had resulted was mixed, all in all. The race had gone on for over 2 months before World First had been claimed, the unfortunate result of a slew of bugs that had taken the servers for the final boss down for weeks, a problem mechanic that was seemingly impossible, and quite simply, inexperience. Despite that, it had shown promise, a spark of what raiding in this game could be under the right circumstances. Interesting puzzles, engaging coordination, and some fantastic set pieces. The magic was evident, and it left the community eager to see what Square Enix would cook up next, and to witness the continuation of a narrative saga that meant so much to so many. If you want to see how the race to World First for the Binding Coil went, I released a long form video just like this surrounding it, and I'd recommend checking it out. It provides colour, context, and an interesting story to boot. And if you want more long-form looks into FF14's past, please do consider subscribing. With the launch of the remade game a success and player count rapidly rising, all eyes were locked firmly on the future. In patch 2.1, the first ever Alliance raid, the Labyrinth of the Ancients, was released, after having been delayed from the initial 2.0. It presented an easier challenge than binding Coil, with far less obligation, and served to whet the appetite of those that were hesitant to dip their toes into the main event. As the promotional cycle for patch 2.2 begun, with it scheduled to go live just over 6 months into the game's life cycle, Yoshida started to candidly discuss the hotly anticipated second raid wing. He grandiosely stated that this second installment would be the hardest dungeon in the game, instilling excitement and fear in equal measure, considering the length of the previous tier's race. The second coil would also require a completion of the binding coil to enter in the first place. If you wanted to see the continuation of the saga, you had to beat the first. A contentious decision considering its difficulty, but new gear and freshly added echo buffs eased its requirements substantially. But this tier would be nothing like the first. By the group's own admission, in Blue Garter's world first clear of turn 1 versus ADS and Caduceus, there were group members that didn't even know they had a silence, when it would have helped them astronomically to do so. In the face of so many new jobs and actions, there was an overwhelming lack of comfortability and knowledge. These 6 months had acted as a training arc, and combat expertise had resultingly soared. Raiders were pushing out more damage, using their defensive tools more efficiently, and had drastically improved their situational awareness. They were beginning to build an understanding of the ways that FF14 liked to throw difficulty at them, and learning how to break it down to overcome it faster than before. Warrior, a tank previously considered borderline useless, had received sweeping changes in the prior patch as well. Initially fashioned as a healing tank, lacking varied defensives but given abundant self-heals in recompense, it just didn't fit with the way encounters were designed. It was too weak. Holmgang, initially just a bind, now gave the user invulnerability to death for a period, and they gained a powerful damage reduction on their attack repelling Vengeance. It became a counterpart to Paladin that was different, but fulfilled the same responsibilities in an equitable way. Monk too received buffs that were intended to bring it back in line with its powerful co-melee Dragoon. Dragoon had become almost indispensable, as groups had clocked on to and taken advantage of the piercing damage debuff that it provided to bards, with bards being one of the most regularly slotted and often doubled up jobs. The two made for a powerful combination. As experience grew, so too did the competition. The number of engaged raiders swelled with the player count, and whilst Blue Garter had enjoyed a fairly uncontested marathon to the finish line in the latter stages of the Twintania push, it was unlikely that the same situation would repeat here. Hours would be longer, expectations would be higher, and the pressure to perform would be greater than ever. Blue Garter was still going strong, and as the current world first title holders were expected to be the favourites to take the win this time as well.
I never necessarily thought or felt that we were the best mechanically at the game. Like, there were other players across different FCs, different servers who were probably just way better at the game than us. But what I tried to really kind of focus in on between first and second coil was, like, as a group with like a team approach, we could lift everyone up and kind of approach things in a smart enough way to maintain an advantage going into second coil.
They were intending to double down on a strategy that had paid dividends for them in the binding coil, which was to field multiple statics within the same banner and provide help to one another through sharing strategies, substitute players when needed, and moral support.
The pressure was on more for the second call. I definitely remember we were more serious about the second Coil than we were the first one. I remember saying, like, when we went into first Coil, it was just like whoever we had, basically, right? Second Coil, we definitely prepared a lot more.
Both parties would be extending their hours, and whilst the majority of the members from that Twintania World First Clear remained in the Free Company, some would either be abstaining from the race entirely, or splitting off in their own directions. So these new rosters in their current iterations were still, at this point, untested, and there was no real predicting what would happen.
It's impossible to go back to that time when we just didn't know what the game was. We didn't understand enough about the game. Effectively, we were able to afford the first large house on Excalibur. So we were trying to balance out filling the FC coffers, preparing for just to have the house because it's like a cool status thing for the FC. Like it was something that everyone could share in as part of the community. One of the things that we struggled with throughout the history of the FC was kind of balancing out the community aspect of the FC versus the kind of more hardcore progression-oriented side of the FC. So when we finished finding Coil and we were going to second Coil, we tried to be more structured and regimented about our approach and process. So we were definitely more serious. We felt the pressure. We realized that the game had a much bigger audience, that there were way more players.
But on the North American data centers, a second group was rapidly rising to prominence. Ultros-based Collision, who had been the 6th team to defeat the Binding Coil, were gearing up for a much more aggressive push this time around. Using their experience in World of Warcraft Cutting Edge, they were hoping to dethrone BG and claim it for themselves. Over on EU, Phoenix-based Shinra shared these lofty aspirations. They had spent these months speed killing and re-clearing, optimizing their damage to be as consistent and perfect as possible, as they hoped to earn their place in pole position in the second Coil race. The Japanese data centers had produced their own promising race team too. Their name was Lucrezia. With these and many more groups climbing in the ring, it would be a truly international competition. Far enough away from launch that even non-legacy servers had been afforded the time to truly reach an even playing field, it was expected that this race would be tighter than ever. One big change, announced and explained beforehand, was that whilst Binding Coil had 5 turns, the second Coil would receive just 4. This sounded like a reduction in content on paper, though in reality it really wasn't, and all of those involved knew that it wouldn't contribute to the length of the race in any meaningful way. The third turn of the initial tier was little more than a glorified jump puzzle, scenery with a pretty label, and its inclusion had been confusing and somewhat disappointing as players learned that actually their 5-battle raid did not include the purported 5 battles. As a result, Square Enix did away with it entirely, and have done so for the rest of FF14's life cycle in the decade plus since. Turns 6 through to 9 would be the gauntlet this time around in its entirety. As March 27th, 2014 approached, the confirmed release date for patch 2.2 through the Maelstrom, all eyes were looking forward, hopeful for glory. Mood in the community was hopeful. Despite its issues, the first release had shown so much promise, and given these extra months to refine their craft, many were confident that the challenges the developers could muster would be an absolute blast to solve. But there was concern too. Would it truly be harder than the 2-month slog that was Binding Coil and Twintania, as Yoshida had stated? If raiding in FF14 was to always be so long-winded and buggy, would it spell doom for the future growth of the raiding scene? More than that, would Blue Garter maintain their crown, or would the newer powers across the various regions rise to snatch it from them? In the crucible of a new raid tier, anything can happen. As it would turn out, and raiders would discover later down the road, Second Coil would include a twist that would make it last almost as long as Twintania had, but not quite in the way that anybody had expected. For now though, their energies were firmly fixed on the login button as servers went live, and with it, the raid was available and progression began. We left off directly after the felling of Twintania clasped upon Bahamut's palm. The expedition had ended in an unexpected way, as in the chambers following this fearsome battle, the adventurers stumble upon Bahamut's head, hooked up to seemingly Allagan technology and possessing a crystal that mimicked a beating heart. The dragon lived. What was more, they saw in the distance a figure that looked suspiciously like Louis Soir, the Archon that had guided the Warrior of Light's way through most of 1.0, and presumed long dead. In the second coil of Bahamut, the foray primarily aims to prevent Bahamut's restoration by deactivating the 3 titular coils bound to it, so that the past can finally be left where it belongs. In turn 6, they travel within Dalamud's shadow in the Shroud, to the entrance of the coil itself, but the way is far from easy. In a continuation of the design philosophy from the initial raid series, second coil is comprised of more than just a sequence of boss arenas. Instead, before being able to see what boss awaits them at the end of the turn, they must traverse the winding walkways and face the native wildlife, finding a way to break through to reach the final destination. In turn 6, there is no door boss or DPS check like the ADS that came before. Instead, there are a series of dark matter clusters blocking the way that must be destroyed. But in response to movement close to them, and as a defensive maneuver, they begin to repeatedly spawn golems until killed, upping the tempo and making the whole affair a desperate race against time. They don't pose much of a threat though, and frontrunners had no issue dealing with them in short order and pushing ahead to face the main threat, Rafflesia. The Rafflesia is known as the corpse flower, one of the largest flowers in the world, named for the stench of rotting meat it emits in an effort to lure insects, which will eventually become its sustenance. In Final Fantasy XIV, the corpses would be the raid if they aren't careful. Just a few attempts in and it was clear to every group tackling it that second coil would be an utterly different beast than the one that came before. Mechanics had more variance and volume than before, and whilst they weren't too difficult to understand and were being quickly solved, if this is the first turn, with 3 more difficult bosses waiting in their future, some of the more experienced players were worried about what might lie ahead, and if it truly could wind up being tougher than Twintania. The opening blows introduce what would become the core loop of the encounter. First, simple conal swipes that weaken the tank taking them, and thorny vines which would latch onto players and tether them together. Those bound to one another would need to spread away in order to snap the vines before they take their toll. Despite being a mechanic that has been replicated countless times in the years since, this was the first time a simple tether break had been implemented in the game. Even that was a fresh new challenge for 2014. But more dangerous were the dark matter bulbs, which would sprout and grow periodically in groups, lacing the ground in thorned vines that would slow and damage any that stepped within. Aside from being an arena hazard though, these also served another purpose entirely: to protect Rafflesia's targets from one of its main abilities. Floral Trap was by far the deadliest attack in this early phase, choosing a target and signifying it with a dripping yellow marker, and then shortly afterwards sucking them in towards the boss, as well as any unwitting party members without the wherewithal to stay well clear. Then, without giving them a moment to avoid their fate, Rafflesia will devour them. Those drawn in and devoured aren't killed, later being spat out for heavy damage and a knockback, but what is much worse is that they give the boss a permanent damage upstack. In being eaten, you make the foe stronger for the rest of the attempt. Using those vines on the ground would slow you, but they would also make you immune to the draw-in entirely. This cycled for the first third of the battle, with ever more complex patterns of tethers and numerous placements of dark matter bulbs, and whilst most of these would repeat for the remainder of the encounter, the moment Rafflesia was reduced below 70%, it would begin to add Blighted Bouquet, which would punish anybody moving when it went off. This was Ordained Stillness before it was a thing. The bigger addition in this second phase though was the Honey Glaze debuff, which would be applied to targets occasionally. These debuffs would attract hornets to the battlefield, which would hungrily eye the honey and attack, and needed to be killed before they hit their enrage. But the honey could be cleansed in one way, just one, being devoured by Rafflesia. So the groups that were attempting to find a way through were given a choice. You can pick your poison. Either deal with an ever increasing number of hornets, kill these annoyances and rip your precious damage away from the boss to do so, or cleanse those debuffs and make the main foe gain damage stacks until the end. Most learnt that the latter, whilst painful, was necessary at minimum item level. As the hours rolled by, frontrunners mastered these mechanics too, and entered the final push. This would signal the end of many of the earlier mechanics, forcing players to stick by the decisions they had made in regards to honey cleansing until the end. Replacing their challenges were 3 dark matter slugs. Acidic honeys would also spawn and give a stacking debuff to players that would eventually spell their doom. The trick to this puzzle was to weaken the slugs, which would prompt them to devour a honey of their own to regain HP. This would cause them to grow and deal more damage, but would allow the party to remove the threat of that debuff that would eventually kill them. It was a phase of careful target prioritization and awareness, ensuring they dealt with anything Rafflesia had to throw at them, while simultaneously clearing the field of slugs and slimes with painstaking caution. But for raid groups like Collision, Blue Garter and Shinra, those that had seen all of these mechanics successfully but were struggling to juggle them all and push to the end, something had to give. They would either spend all of their time dealing with ads, resulting in Rafflesia's health feeling like an insurmountable wall, or the pins would tumble to the floor, resulting in a black screen. The first one to find a way to break through would claim world first, that much was clear. It was the how that was the problem. They couldn't wait for more gear, and dealing with all those damage stacks and the slimes and slugs was slow going. Pull counts went into the dozens as the hours crept by. Luckily, those hours were not an issue. With so many groups so close, it was all but assured that someone, somewhere, would be moving on to turn 7 in the very first day. Many groups were planning upwards of 12 hours per day to raid in that first week, in pursuit of the coveted title of World First. They knew competition was stronger this time, and they wanted to snatch every advantage they possibly could. The race was becoming exponentially more serious as tiers went by. In the original Binding Coil, 8 hours was seen as a very long day, only to be invested in the first week or so by the most committed cutting-edge teams. This trend of the hours expected for hardcore groups to be able to compete ever increasing was one that would continue on even to this very day. The strategy that eventually bore fruit was a risky one, but sometimes a risky play is exactly what's needed to win. Phase 3 beckoned, and by that point it was essential to have removed all honey stacks entirely to prevent bees from disrupting the plan, regardless of how many damage stacks Rafflesia received as a result. Once there, as the slugs spawned, the caster would immediately limit break, destroying them all in one fell swoop. The slimes would spawn shortly afterwards, and the raid would ignore them. From there, it was a race against time. Carve 30% from Rafflesia's health pool before hitting 10 stacks and dying to the potent damage over time, or try again and crit harder the next time. In a nail-biting run, eventually it seemed like there was a chance it could pay off, as the percentage ticked down and the debuff ticked up, 8, then to 9. The end was in sight. Party members were dropping like flies, the casters, then the shield healer. The tanks blasted their personal mitigations, 10,000 HP left on the boss. They just needed a few more GCDs. Then, the screen goes black. But it isn't because of a wipe, they have done it! Turn 6 has been defeated on the very first day of the raid tier, and claiming first place is not previous champions Blue Garter, but their American-based rivals, Collision. Collision had taken their inaugural world first and cemented themselves as a force in the second coil. Shortly after Collision, second place was taken by European-based Shinra, and 2 hours after those, one of Blue Garter's group got on the board and cleared turn 6 too. Just a couple of hours separated the top 3, and when races in the past had been decided by days or even weeks, such a small amount of time here meant that any lead Collision had built up could crumble from just one single fumble or confusion on the road ahead. In a testament to the increasing skill level of FF14's raiders though, these 3 were far from the only triumphs over the second coil's first boss in the first 2 days of the raid tier. Over 20 groups by my counting, and in reality likely significantly more if we count the ones that were not reported publicly, bested the corpse flower and moved on to turn 7. One of the tricks up Collision's sleeve that had helped edge them over to victory was their double caster composition, slotting 2 summoners in the party. Summoner was a job that hadn't been thoroughly tested in A Realm Reborn's first tier due to time constraints, but it had turned out to be a powerful and agile DPS, capable of dealing significant single target and AoE damage, move with less difficulty than its direct counterpart Black Mage, and of significance in this encounter in particular, focused a good percentage of its output on its damage over time spells. Whilst it wasn't the deal breaker by any means, and the following groups to claim second and third did not use the same composition, but being able to leave the dot running on Rafflesia whilst dealing with both the Hornet and the Caster LB allowed them to eke out those tiny extra bits of DPS, which in a clear as close as theirs could have just made the difference. The adventurers arrive at the outer coil, an endless procession of azure-lit passageways flickering with the silhouettes of unseen chimeric monstrosities. There, they encounter Nael, who attempts to warn them off before quickly departing. This was a big revelation. Nael was the main antagonist of FF14's 1.0 storyline, and the battle against the Garlean at Riven Road accompanied the final sequence of patches before those servers went down to make way for redevelopment, acting as a capstone party encounter for the initial run. Presumed dead too. Why were dead people coming back to life inside the coil? The turn starts, and in what has become tradition at this point, a sequence of trash pack encounters blocks the way to the eventual final boss. They take an elevator through the facility and are accosted by Rogue Lamia's ADS modules and returning foes from the earlier Binding Coil encounters. Giant cobras, in appearance identical to those in turn 1 and 5, though somewhat less threatening than their boss status counterparts, and Dreadguards, the same ones that one-shot players in Twintania, a malicious callback before the main event. Blocking the entrance to the final sector, at the end of the line, the raid comes across turn 7's main event, the Lamia Melusine. Much like Rafflesia, Melusine has a number of phases strictly segmented by HP percentage. This was a big departure from more recent FF14 design philosophy, which generally favours ignoring HP percentage in most cases and instead just plays out a sequence of set-piece mechanics one after another in a fixed order, allowing players to do their best to deal damage during the windows presented to them. Percentage pushes are interesting and come with their own set of boons and flaws. It rewards careful and painstaking control of the party's damage output, rather than simply pumping out as much as possible, always being the best choice at all times. In some moments, it's better to do less damage to ensure a push at a convenient moment, rather than to just zoom fast regardless of the consequence. Finding out what new challenges awaited at each percentage push and how to juggle them effectively became an essential skill in the Raiders toolkit in those early days of A Realm Reborn. But, as we had seen in the turn 5 race, playing too safe in regards to push timings could quickly result in enrage issues further down the line. The first phase features regular cleaves and circular point-blank attacks that must be avoided, as well as fireballs that blast onto ranged players for heavy damage, forcing them into a spread formation to avoid overlapping the pain. But really, these are just filler inconveniences to complicate the main mechanic of the phase, and the foundation of Turn 7's challenge, Cursed Voice. Cursed Voice was a debuff that would afflict multiple party members at once, and when it hit 0, it would have them blast out a conal petrify in their line of sight. They had to carefully manage both their positioning and their facing to avoid their allies and Melusine, for if she accidentally caught a stray, she would permanently increase her damage for the rest of the fight. The second part of the puzzle came in the form of these Renauds that periodically spawn, hulking Cyclops monsters that will slowly, and with purpose, thud towards whichever player has the bravery to attack them first. The Cursed Voice can be turned against them, rendering them stone, removing them as a threat. From there, a single hit will make them crumble. As her health reduces, she adds to this outfit of challenges, a sequence of Lamia soldiers that spawn in tandem and must be prioritized to avoid the overwhelming attacks as they begin to mount after 30 seconds. A new debuff, the Cursed Shriek, like Cursed Voice in many ways, but different. Worse. This time, instead of a simple conal gaze, it will pulsate in all directions like a flood of death, turning those in its path to stone. It spells death for the party in short measure, and there is nothing that can be done to prevent it. At least that's how it appeared at first. Groups quickly put 2 and 2 together, and at last, it all made sense. Why were there Cyclopses spawning constantly? It had to be more than just an annoyance, an extra job for the ranged DPS to excel at in kiting them before they could be petrified. Well, the petrified Renauds acted as an object, and in FF14, objects can be used to line of sight attacks. Using the Renaud was the key. It acted as the stone wall to protect the rest of the party from Cursed Shriek.
There were fewer things to parse, to figure out, to deduce back then, but the landscape of possibility was still pretty broad back then. Things hadn't been figured out, so Turn 7 was a pretty crazy fight, and there will never be a fight like that ever again in Final Fantasy XIV's history.
This became the minigame often assigned to the bard of the group to juggle in amongst everything else. Kite the Renaud, keep him away from you and the others. Make sure he gets turned to stone in a convenient place, one that the Cursed Shriek can be easily cordoned off at. Much of the burden of success or failure in an attempt was placed solely on the shoulders of this one player, and the groups with a physical range that adapted and learnt quickly found faster success than others as a direct result. While Stool Summoners had been such a boon in Turn 6, in Turn 7 they added an additional foil to affairs that had to be juggled. Because of the number of adds that would spawn, if the caster wasn't extremely vigilant it was all too easy for their Eggy to automatically retarget to one of those petrified Renauds after killing their initial victim, and set in motion a series of unfortunate events. But they were much more proficient at kiting than a Black Mage could, opening up the group's options drastically. In the third phase, new mobs are introduced, simple threats to be felled before they overwhelm the raid. The arena's rings will begin to glow too, vastly limiting free space. As Melusine grows in desperation, she begins to cast Petrifaction herself, as do her minions, and the chaos grows. The entire fight is one of finding consistency within the confusion. Assembling the puzzle pieces is one thing, and most frontrunners were able to do so in short order, but the execution itself was a far greater obstacle. Day 1 faded into Day 2, and Day 2 into Day 3 without a reported kill. The hours ticked by, and as the number of groups battling Melusine climbed into the dozens, it was surprising to hear such radio silence from those who had spent so many hours fighting her.
Looking back on the fight, I love it. I think it's incredible. I think it's like one of the coolest fights that existed at that point in time in the game.
Yeah, 10-7 is still probably one of my favorite fights. I think it's such a simple fight. Like, there's not really much going on, but like, you're constantly having to do stuff. You're constantly having to adjust. And yeah, like, one mistake basically can completely screw you.
Funnily enough, years later at a fan festival developer panel, Naoki Yoshida and Kenji Sudo would talk about Second Coil's fight design, amongst many other topics, and Sudo would specifically cite the Melusine fight as a learning moment for him. Both the Renauds and the Cursed Voice were amongst his top 3 bad mechanics that had been implemented into the game by 2016, in his opinion, and showed regret for the style of challenge they presented, as well as the advantage they gave to some jobs over others. But that wouldn't help the challengers in the race. They just needed to overcome. For now, it seemed that Turn 7 had the upper hand. That wouldn't last though. On March 29th, the third day of progression, a post appeared on Reddit. A clear had come in. A group had defeated Turn 7. Shinra had posted their clear. The European team had done it. But upon a refresh, it turned out that something was amiss. There was not one clear post, but 2. Collision had done it too. World First and World Second had both been claimed, and based on the timestamps, had happened within 1 single minute of one another. Much to their chagrin, Shinra had actually killed it after Collision. Barely. Collision had taken World First and Shinra had taken World Second, on the same pull, within a single minute. 2 entire days of progression on a battle, with the victor being decided by less than 1 minute. More than that, Collision had taken their second win of the tier. They were well on their way to the clean sweep. With 2 groups neck and neck moving on to turn 8, it really did feel like Collision and Shinra were equally matched, and would remain so for the rest of the race. Later that day, Blue Garter cleared once more, taking the podium, though by no means in the position that they would have hoped for. But as Turn 8 progression got well and truly underway, it was here that the Second Coil race would take a sequence of truly unexpected twists. After Melusine falls, the adventurers continue on the elevator deep into the central decks, a huge maze filled with Allagan automatons. Through the maze is their objective, though it is clear that the small fry skulking the corridors are not the only threats that block the way. The trash packs before the boss here take the form of a sequence of clockwork enemies, akin to those that make up the main threat of Binding Coil's 4th turn, separated by jump plates and armoured bulwarks. These once more are easy to defeat, with Shinra and Collision both surging through without any issue whatsoever immediately after their nail-biting Turn 7 victories. At the end of the line, their main boss of the floor, the Avatar, awaits them. Turn 8's boss is one fondly remembered to this day by many that tackled it at the time, one which exemplifies the design decisions of old, presenting them in a way that can be overcome in so many different fashions, with advantages for each based on composition, group strength, and preference. Despite that, it was tough to find a working strat amidst so many moving parts in the early days of blind progression. The core of the encounter centered around these towers, found on the edge of the arena. They periodically charge up, stacks indicated by these glowing bars found on their sides, and will eventually reach maximum charge over time. When they hit max, they'll summon an enemy or arena hazard to deal with, throwing a spanner in the works for the party. These hazards included devastating raid wides that, if paired up with another mechanic, usually spelt an immediate wipe. There were also dreadnoughts that would apply intense pressure on the tank, bashing away at them until defeated, and sets of landmines that needed to be carefully detonated away from the rest of the party by one brave player. If two of these towers reached maximum charge at the same time, it would cause a wipe. Players could expedite the charging process by standing within the energy fields at the foot of each tower, taking damage themselves to do so and weakening them from any further towers they may charge in the future. Because of this, it had to be utilised sparingly, when needed, rather than spammed to generate advantageous timings. It was a whole new language to learn, memorizing the symbols of what each tower did and gaining an understanding of which towers should be charged, when, and by whom in order to find success. During all of this, the avatar is rooted to the center of the arena, regularly crippling the tank with high damage cleaves and blasting out gaseous bombs and homing lasers, which must be shared with the party and kited safely away from them respectively. In Phase 2, Brainjack takes control away from the main tank, forcing them against their will to attack their closest ally, immediately followed up by a cleave. Because Avatar's facing follows the tank, it's all too easy for the group to find themselves facing a party-wide tank buster if a sacrificial lamb isn't carefully chosen and positioned to receive the Mindjack tank's ire. Ballistic missiles begin to shoot too, and must be shared in various quantities to make their damage survivable. Too few or too many, and it quickly becomes problematic. As the final phase, 3, begins, all of these are coupled with Allagan Field debuffs, the most deadly of all. Allagan Field would debuff a player and count down. During that duration, it'd compile every single point of damage that player took throughout its duration, and when it hit 0, it would explode, pulsing double that accrued damage to the entire raid. This essentially forced groups to come up with strategies to solve all of the other challenges that didn't necessitate their full party, as at times some would just be unavailable to contribute without Allagan Field becoming an instant wipe. All of this creates an encounter that intentionally forces players to make tough choices, to be put in bad situations in the hopes that they come up with a creative solution. The towers being the core of the fight that must be solved immutably, but everything else surrounding them acting to remove players from being able to deal with tower mechanics, or dealing damage to the party in such a way that it makes those towers and Allagan Field more restrictive to complete. It proved a wall, and progression slowed to a snail's pace as a result. Turn 6 had died on the first day, and Turn 7 on the third. Yet by the evening of the 5th, there had been little news from the frontrunners on their trials and tribulations against the Avatar. But the problem, seemingly, was not actually the mechanics. They were difficult, yes, but these were the best FF14 players in the world. Puzzles stood no chance against them when they had extended hours on their side. They created a plan, played safe, and surged ahead. But in a departure from many of the Coil bosses thus far, Avatar featured a hard enrage at the 11-minute mark. The moment they got there, the raid immediately wiped and had to go again. This enrage was tight. It seemed impossible to overcome. Frontrunners like Collision and Shinra would make it to this barrier, but they wouldn't even be close. If they kept playing safe, they would hit the enrage, and in making big risks to allow their healers and tanks to output the extra damage that might push them over the finish line, they would inevitably run into survivability problems and wipe. It was so difficult to maintain the balance, and one misplaced homing laser or poorly managed Allergan field would spell doom to the attempt. Without a bit of luck, it genuinely felt gear-gated. Groups didn't give up, but their confidence dwindled. But right at the end of March, pushing against the impending weekly reset, a report came in. A group had managed to defeat Turn 8, the boss that had been considered gear-gated. The group moving on to the final battle in the tier, having claimed world first on the 3rd, was Blue Garter. From out of nowhere, they had surged into pole position.
Honestly, I think that the competition had probably stronger groups, like stronger overall players. But I think that our group was just really good. We enjoyed playing together, and like it really did like kind of click, that group did.
The groups and spectators alike couldn't believe it. How on earth had they done it? Was their damage so superior to the rest of the competitors? Surely not. They had figured something out that the other racers hadn't. That much was clear. It would turn out that the edge they had gained was the result of a realization that would make the other front-running groups feel like an April Fool in hindsight.
When we cleared the fight, we specifically like uploaded a screenshot and made sure we did not show the comp, because we knew like as soon as we showed a comp, other people were going to clear it.
Much earlier in the video, I talked about the power of Dragoon and its synergy with physical range, resulting in many groups running it. Warrior, too, had been buffed and found its way alongside Paladin into the majority of tanking pairs. But I also mentioned that Monk had been buffed. Some groups were using a Monk, Blue Garter and Collision included, and were likely feeling that their choice had turned out great for them. Their comfort pick had been powerful, and their damage was rewarded as a result. Well, it turned out that Monk was stronger than anybody had quite anticipated initially.
This is the days where TP existed. TP was the enemy to like a lot of people, I think. You had a Bard, and the Bard could do TP Song, or they could do Foe Requiem, which increased the damage of your casters. Everyone else was like, oh, Foe is so much better. We figured out pretty early on that Monk is kind of insane if you just give it TP to do its job. This is back when you could just have one monk do Dragon Kick and the other monks do Boot Shine only.
Blue Garter had noticed the significant advantage that Monk posed in this encounter and decided to go all in. They decided to test their hypothesis that Monk was the key to their ticket into turn 9.
I think we owe that success to being willing to just try it, to just iterate a ton on different strats. And when someone has like some crackpot idea of like, hey, let's just throw 3 monks at it, then okay, we're stuck at 10%, let's just do it. I think the math checks out.
Our best attempt, I think, with doing a normal comp was like us wiping at 10%, and then we switched to triple monk and we beat it by like 30 seconds.
The plan was simple. One monk would focus purely on maintaining Dragon Kick uptime, providing the blunt resistance debuff that increases the DPS that each monk attack does. The other 2 would reap the benefits. After just a handful of pulls, it was clear that they had cracked it. They would further cement their dominance in turn 8 by claiming world second shortly afterwards, with Blue Garter's second group using their accrued information to shoot past the competition.
The turn 8 double clear on the same night before weapons, I think is one of my proudest achievements as one of the leaders of the FC, because it meant that our approach to having depth in the roster and having people feel comfortable with mixing and matching and swapping in and out everyone was really psyched and stoked to be like pushing at that point in time. It was still pretty early in Prague, so like people weren't burnt out yet. After the team that I was in cleared, I hopped into the voice chat. The other team, we were cheering them on, and they knocked it out like I think an hour or two before reset. It was like down to the wire, I'm pretty sure.
Even Square Enix couldn't believe this turn of events. They had expected turn 8 to fall sometime during the second week of progression, and seeing a week 1 kill had come as a big shock. A true testament to the ingenuity and commitment that Blue Garter had displayed in their non-standard setup. A staff member of Square Enix's community team curiously contacted the raid group for information, as well as video evidence of how they managed to pull off the win.
The dev team realized that they needed to, I guess, be closer to the pulse of like what was actually happening in prog groups. Like they needed to like be closer to like what was happening. So the community team reached out to some of the progression teams. I'm pretty sure we weren't the only ones, and we're just kind of like monitoring progression more closely. They saw how good players were in general, you know, going from binding to second and then final coil, seeing how good the player base was becoming, and then they massively overcorrected for Heaven's Word. They wanted to verify what was happening. They didn't think that we had done anything wrong.
I don't think they actually thought it was possible to be cleared that early. I think that was the thing. And then we killed it and they were like, oh, wait, how did you guys do that?
Unlike turn 6 and 7, this time was a blowout. There was no second place finish within the same minute, hour, or even day. It wouldn't be until the late hours of April 4th that World Third was claimed by Collision. They too had come up with an interesting strategy that had bore fruit and enabled them to pass the DPS check, though an entirely different approach than BG's. They had opted to field only a single tank alongside 5 DPS players. It had made certain mechanics such as the brainjacking slightly tighter to execute, but there was nothing in Avatar's fight that required a second tank as such, so it was no problem to adjust to this new composition. This strategy quickly rose to prominence as many groups adopted the exact same 5 DPS 1 tank setup to defeat turn 8 themselves, and many used it elsewhere too. It became the de facto T8 advantage, and Square Enix took notice. In the coming raids, they would pay special attention to ensuring that 2 tanks would be encouraged in battle, and in many instances would be necessary in order to find success with all but the most broken and difficult bypasses. In the time that Collision had been working towards the clear though, Blue Garter had pulled away. Days of advantage to focus on the final challenge in turn 9. In the days between Blue Garter's World First and Collision's 3rd place finish, a number of other wins were logged. Illegitimate kills using cheats to manipulate the Z-axis of their characters. They would end up above the arena and the avatar would be unable to do anything aside from slowly succumb to their attacks. 24 service accounts were suspended in relation to the cheating a few days later, a clear sign from the developers that they were deadly serious about dealing with those that didn't want to play fair. As turn 9 begins, the adventurers arrive at the Hollow Charts, the final level of the second Coil. But to their surprise, the arena resembles the Riven Road down to a T, the exact same location that the Warriors of Light had defeated Nael Van Darnus 5 years ago at the end of 1.0. Waiting for them there is Nael, seemingly reincarnated, but starkly different. The two parties trade blows and Nael claims that she will bring about a second calamity, transforming into a dragon-esque beast clearly modelled after Bahamut itself, the product of tempering and corruption. And the final battle begins. In a departure from the other 3 turns, Nael's battle is firmly segmented into a sequence of unique phases, with only minor mechanical carryover from one another. Rafflesia, Melusine and Avatar had taken a core concept and used it throughout their runtime, ever adding new components to the mix as the foray had gone on. This change had felt fresh, welcome. The first phase was a dance constructed of a mixture of spreads, stack, in and out dodges, and unique tank busters, introducing the first appearance of the now iconic FF14 attacks Lunar Dynamo and Iron Chariot. Every tank buster would leave a ticking time bomb on its target. When it finished counting down, it would explode, and allies had to give its victim a wide berth in order to survive the blast. Everything was given a dynamic element by Nael's penchant for leaping across the arena, landing on a player, and then rapidly channeling a dynamo or chariot, forcing the raid to scatter like flies being swatted. Players would periodically need to bait the positioning of meteors as they dropped to the ground, mitigating the heavy damage they accrued and keeping them spread apart from one another. Once a third of her health is depleted, Nael exits the stage for the time being, giving way to the ads phase. More meteors, so many that it becomes all too easy to run out of space and cause an overlap, followed by a subsequent explosion. But once the art of carefully positioning them had been mastered, in amongst the random targeting and overwhelming damage, the golems begin to spawn and the real challenge begins. Each of these golems executes different mechanics, signified by their colour, and they will swap colours periodically to force the raid to learn every possible set. 3 golems which must be split. 2 can be taken by tanks easily enough, but the third must be handled by the rest of the party, as they soak its auto attacks and attempt to lead it away from its peers safely. If a golem comes close to a meteor, it will eat it, growing in size and becoming stronger as a result. All of the meteors must be removed from play, or they will force a wipe. But if a single golem eats more than 3 meteors, they will cause one themselves. It's simple at heart, but the execution was often too close for comfort. Blue Garter, using their considerable lead and the resources at their disposal, had come up with a unique approach to turn 9 progression. Instead of their 2 groups acting as entirely separate entities, they combined their resources and worked as a community. A win for either team would be considered a win for the free company.
It had pros and cons. We tried to really push the idea that like a victory for the FC is a victory for everyone. So when we succeed together as an entire FC, as an organization. It's tough to balance that out between like individual goals. Like people want to push themselves and do really well, and you know it's always great to like see yourself in that screenshot when you clear the fight. We tried to kind of figure out a way to where we could have 2 really, really good groups, and we wanted people to feel like there was no Team 1 and Team 2, and we would eventually have one team that would be pushing the hardest for World First, because people have real life work, school schedules that would eventually cause them to taper off their gameplay.
They discussed strategy as a collective, substituting out players so that both groups could profit and take healthy breaks. As Week 2 begun, the break away from work and real-life responsibilities faded for most groups gunning for first place, so using this approach helped Blue Garter invest more hours, more resources, and keep their players fresh. The plan was that eventually, when they were in sight of making a push for the kill, they would easily be able to field the party that they believed would give them the best chance of success, and then go for the win. First phase went quickly for the most part, aside from the largest sticking point in meteors. They targeted randomly and players could receive multiple, one after another, and in unlucky patterns the free space filled up extremely quickly, often causing wipe states due to overlap. With such high damage incoming, if the healers constantly in sequence received meteors, it made the entire cycle devastating to have to handle. Blue Garter tried what their minds immediately went to as a solution, which was to Mario Kart around the edge of the arena as a group, but it didn't bear fruit. Consistency was an issue.
Mario Kart wouldn't have worked for us. Like it literally would not have worked. I think we tried it. I didn't want to think that the fight had been designed to encourage you to run around in a circle for a minute. I'm pretty confident that Mario Kart would not have been. We could have done it, but I don't think it would have been reproducible. We couldn't have used it for clears. And one of the things that came up often in our strategy discussions was not necessarily will this strat work for this next attempt, but will this strat work for re-clears? Like, is this strat good enough for us to keep on doing it and get past it to the next step every time? Because if the strat isn't good enough to do that, then we need to fine-tune it more or rethink it.
So what we did is we spread out around the room using the floor as markers for where we would stand. And essentially each person would have 3 spots that they could drop a meteor at. And essentially, if you got a meteor, you would start in one position. If you get a meteor, you move to your right. And then if you got another one, you'd move forward. So you'd make a triangle out of the meteors.
This flew in the face of what many of their competitors would turn to when they made it through the same mechanic. Most saw the potential of Mario Kart and committed to it, even if, in rare cases, it could make things overwhelmingly difficult to manage. Once Blue Garter, who had reached this point first by virtue of the extra days ahead of the pack they'd earned, managed to fell the golems twice over, clearing away each and every meteor in the process, they were treated to this.
Get ready for the possible next thing. What? Mega Flare? She Mega Flare? Oh, look, what? Keep your shit together, pay attention.
Tank LB, stay alive. We gotta see as much as possible.
The second half of the duel with Nael changes in tone entirely as she cracks open and transforms the arena itself by calling in the Heavens Fall pillar. From there, the old is forgotten and new challenges are introduced. The tower will keep impaling the room periodically, knocking raiders away and forcing them to avoid crackling AoE patterns telegraphing from the center, whilst Nael herself begins to use stronger auto attacks, a multi-hit tank buster called Bahamut's Claw, and the room begins to be pelted with supernovas that reduce playable space. She also summons dragons to aid her, the ghosts of Melusinia, which immediately become a priority target, often the recipient of a sharp melee LB3. The ghost of Melusinia and Nael as well would apply garrote to players, with the former stacking it up on repeat until defeated. 9 stacks of garrote meant immediate death, whilst defeating a ghost of Melusinia would drop a few precious puddles on the ground, which could cleanse the debuff entirely. Keeping stacks as low as possible and cleansing them appropriately became key. After solving and slogging through all of this though, came Nael's greatest challenge. Her final phase featuring what became the wall for the entire last week of progression. Dive bombs.
What is that, Mark? Twister?
It's a dive bomb.
That's dive bomb. Holy shit. That's fucking beautiful.
No wonder the arena's flat.
Oh god.
Dive bombs in turn 9 were all about situational awareness and maintaining control within a sea of RNG. Dragons would appear flanking the arena walls, preparing for their attack. They would target players, prime themselves, and then they swoop, and chaos reigns. What became such a sticking point about this mechanic is that in order to find success, the group needed to move in unison. There needed to be some level of chemistry. Ideally, the dragons would be baited to fly across the edges of the arena, and the party could safely dodge away using the majority of the space. But with the dragons spawning in random positions and targeting random party members, this was easier said than done.
It's impossible to go back to that time when we just didn't know what the game was. We didn't understand enough about the game. And so if you get hit by turn 7 or turn 9 and all this shit is happening, and you just don't have that library of references to go back to.
Practically every group at the forefront handled this a slightly different way. There were entire discussions and threads on forums and message boards on the easiest way to break down this challenge. It just seemed so difficult. Images like this one show how even when you break down the dive bombs into their most basic form, they were still a difficult pill to swallow. Cycling in between iterations of dive bombs were dynamos, chariots, leaps, stacks and spreads returning from phase 1, as well as the introduction of fire, ice and thunder. Those dragons, ever the menace, will shoot rocks of solid ice at players, giving them the ice bitten debuff. Tethers will appear too, and being hit by them gives the fire scorch debuff. Be hit by the same element twice in a row without cancelling it out with a lash of the opposing one, and death is both instant and painful. Thunders would force targets to spread, often intersecting with dynamos, chariots, fire, and ice to create tight formations of safety in amongst the far-reaching danger. It was an absolute mess. The enrage was of no real concern to those at the cutting edge because, with so many plates spinning all at once, inevitably they ended up toppling long before groups were able to reach it in the first place. Nael's battle ended up being the breaking point for many. Collision suffered a number of member losses throughout progression, either due to lacking availability, motivation, disagreement, or a mixture of the three, and the group had to go on a recruiting spree to even continue, tearing precious knights away from a roster that was already on the back foot. Interestingly enough, and on a slight tangent, one of their eventual recruits was one of the tanks from Blue Garter's world-first Twin Tania clear. The player in question had taken a short break raiding with their own FC of friends, but the drive to push for a top placement never really left, so they had taken action. Blue Garter suffered too. The Free Company's leader and one of the main roster had to move house across the country during the second week, and so the team subbed in a member from the second group, making their own adjustment to the team, one which they became more and more convinced had the mettle to claim another world first tier completion for their community. Their new addition brought with them a tombstone weapon, and the precious additional DPS was definitely welcomed. But evening by evening, pull by pull, execution improved. In the case of Blue Garter, as they reached Nael's final phase and came face to face with dive bombs, instead of investing precious time into piecing together a strategy that everyone could understand and execute, they took a more time-sensitive approach. One or two players were adept at figuring out the dragons innately. It was the type of puzzle they were just naturally strong at solving, and they would just command the others, shepherding them to safety.
When we got there, I remember we were trying to learn it and we were like trying to figure out if there was like a pattern to where the dragons spawned. We could never really figure it out. I was literally like not even attacking the boss half the time. I was just looking at where the dragons were, and essentially our strat was just figure it out.
We didn't have the thing that we wanted, which was a strat that would work every time. We were so close to killing the fight, and we had people who could solve it. So we said, I know you got a lot of shit to worry about right now. Can you just solve this mechanic for us so we can get the clear?
Risky, but as long as they gamed hard enough, it was winnable.
7.28.
Oh, shit.
Is this enrage, maybe?
That's the enrage.
This is the enrage, yeah.
As he said, better be just an enrage.
6.9%.
That was 13 minutes, that was. So it's probably a 13-minute enrage.
Okay.
Alright, that's fair.
Alright.
That's the fight.
That is the fight, man.
Hell yes.
On the evening of April 13th, 2 weeks and change since the initial release of the second coil of Bahamut, Blue Garter strung together a pull.
safe spot is over here.
Mark.
Split. I will be clutching in B. Move away from B. Pots.
Lead in the break, man.
I need big mules. Favor.
Yeah! Yes! I fucking love all of you guys. Yes!
Too powerful.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Fucking dead.
Fucking good job, guys.
It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was enough. If anything, the fact that the tail end of this successful attempt was so messy, pockmarked with deaths and subsequent recoveries, was proof of the fact that they deserved it. They played out of their skins, and it showed. Blue Garter had defeated Nael and claimed world first on turn 9 and on the tier. They had cleared turn 8 week 1, shocking the game's own developers. They had taken Binding Coil, and they had taken second Coil. They were categorically the greatest free company in A Realm Reborn, and nobody could contest that, no matter what the future would hold. Just over a week later, in the 56th letter from the producer, a segment Naoki Yoshida used to run regularly alongside the live letters, he mentioned the win. In amongst his recounting of the then recent PlayStation 4 version release and his excitement at promotional events for the Chinese version of the game, he left a small but significant message. Exceeding our expectations by leaps and bounds, we were astounded to find the final turn of the second coil of Bahamut has been cleared by an intrepid group of players, hailing from the Order of the Blue Garter. Congratulations, your skill and commitment is an inspiration to adventurers everywhere.
We kind of inherited this like old school raiding mentality of like, we're not going to talk to anyone, we're not going to share strats, we're not going to discuss things publicly except for like, you know, some very brief like front-facing statements on like forums and stuff. So for second coil, yeah, we weren't like sharing strats, we were reading what people were posting publicly. We had some pretty crude spreadsheeting going on internally. I've talked a lot about like how good everyone else in the group was, and like I don't think I'm that great of a player, but the one thing that I did that I'm really proud of is translate and mediate. So when you have a bunch of really smart people who have different perspectives on how you should solve something, trying to figure out that middle space where, okay, how do we approach this in a way where we can make sure that everyone feels heard and understood and that we're moving forward together as a group? Like that was my biggest challenge, and I didn't always succeed, but that was something that I worked the hardest at in our group specifically, because I knew that other people would figure out the strats. I knew that other people would play better than me, would do more DPS. But what I could contribute was trying to make sure that everyone got to that same page faster, trying to shortcut that process.
Collision, overcoming their roster struggles, would eventually take second place, and from there the floodgates opened and the general raiding populace began to etch their tier completions in history too. The second coil would be remembered as a raid much more positively than the previous one, more complex, more fulfilling, and more interesting. If such a positive trajectory were to be continued going forward, the future of FF14's raids and of the world first race was one to be truly excited about. FF14's world race and its community is an ever-evolving Ouroboros. Competition is constantly rising, and with it ours, expectations and the size of teams. Whilst a raid is an 8-man group, nowadays many top competitors have an entire squad of support members there to aid in analysis, strategy, and offsetting the mental load from the players in instance. Sleeping at all in a savage competition will usually directly equal giving up on world first with the lightning fast races of today. Quality of life has increased so much as well. Before, you had to manually travel to the zone in the area of the raid to access it. Raid groups were often tied to a free company or larger community rather than isolated in their own shells. Cross-world travel didn't exist, limiting the quantity of the player base that you could interact with and build relations with. Yet, for all these positive changes that have occurred, something was lost. A sense of belonging, a place of community. In the increasing of our options, in the ease of our access, we have unwittingly floated out to a sea of isolation. Realm Reborn's races and Blue Garter's victories act as a reminder of the importance of that community.
Of course we wanted to win, right? Like, you want to win. It's not a win at all costs type thing.
There's that social fabric that doesn't get talked about a lot when it comes to being good at video games. People don't necessarily talk about like team chemistry that much. But if you look at any discussion of team sports, it's a huge topic, right? Having a group of people that you genuinely care about, that you want to succeed with together, I think that is by far the most important thing. More so than mechanics or being good at strats or reaction times, it's really the people. And I think if you care about the people you're playing with, then you do better, right? You play better for them because you're not just in it for yourself.
It exemplifies the virtue of working together, of building something that all can be proud of. Their victory belongs to them. Not just the 8 that beat the fight and got the achievement, but all of them. The additional groups in the FC that provided their time, energy and players to help in prog. The crafters and gatherers that supported the team with items and consumables. The social members that cheered them on and helped to keep morale high when the wall seemed likely to never fall. The management that built everything, that built the foundation for what everybody would come together to call home. The wins belong to them all. They built it to be so.
When we had FanFest, I wish more members of our FC had been able to go out there. Square Enix's community team, Final Fantasy XIV's community team, knew that myself and a few others were going to be there. They invited us to go up on stage and do like an interview about raiding, which was super fucking cool. And then Famitsu reached out to us through the community team, and we did a short interview with them also, and it was extremely gratifying as an FC, as like a group, to see us getting shouted out, on the Lodestone and then at FanFest. Definitely something I'm super proud of, and I hope that like everyone who participated in the FC at that point in time is still like proud of that to this day, because like it definitely didn't work all the time, but we tried to push, the FC motto. Like, it wasn't just words. Like, we tried to really push that perspective of like, we are here to succeed together as a team, not as individuals, and we need to be humble about it, and we need to not get complacent. Some of my fondest memories from raiding aren't necessarily the clears themselves, but during prog, we would finish, a 4 to 12 hour session, depending on, how far along we were. And then we would be like, okay, we've just been playing the game for 12, 14 hours, 16 hours sometimes straight, basically with like breaks for food or whatever. We need to log off and immediately go to sleep so that we can start prog again tomorrow. And then we would not immediately go to sleep. We would shoot the shit for another 2 hours on voice chat and fuck ourselves over for the next day. And then people would wake up late, miss their alarms the next day, and be like, guys, come on, we gotta log on time. We agreed, but it was really fun.
Whilst nowadays many of them will have gone about their separate ways, this shared time connects them. Really, that's what MMO games are all about. Community, friendship, found family, and of course, some damn fun raid battles. This is the part where I would usually end the video, thanking you all for watching with a nice little capstone on the second coil as a raid to bid it farewell. But the second coil race wasn't quite over yet, and Lucrezia, one of the teams I made note of at the beginning, hasn't been mentioned. That's because this tier was more unique than any before or after, releasing a series of challenge modes afterwards with a race wholly of their own. But that story is one for next time. I think it'll be quite a lot shorter than this one, too. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. I have a Patreon, you don't need to support it, but if you do, it will allow me to keep uploading here more regularly. If you want to see the uncut version of my conversation with Tyrith and Carraway, it's available exclusively there, as well as any pre-release excerpts that I put up. The people on screen now are the reason I was able to make this one, and I'm greatly appreciative. If you do sign up, I add pre-release materials for future videos, as well as some exclusive content, and you'll be included in the credits of future videos. And of course, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.